Look at this face. Not a Hollywood extra, but a real survivor of medieval war. Now imagine war isn't on a movie screen. It's banging at your door. No armor, no army, just your wits. If a single bell meant everything could change, would you freeze, run, or risk it all? Calling the police? Not in the Middle Ages, unless your neighbor Greg is a legend. Forget royal tales, this is survival from the dirt up. The first move, it all started with a sound. Next, the warning systems that meant life or death. So, with the bell tolling like history's most terrifying dinner invitation, what was plan A? It was simple. Run. Not a panicked, headless chicken scramble, but a calculated, desperate sprint for the one place an army couldn't easily follow: the wilds. They fled to the dense forests, the murky swamps, and the rolling hills that they knew better than the back of their own calloused hands. As historian Barbara Tuchman vividly chronicles in her descriptions of the calamitous 14th century, entire villages would empty out in minutes, melting into the landscape. This was a recognized, almost formal defensive maneuver. Now, imagine yourself in that moment. You're not just going for a hike. You're running a brutal obstacle course where every snapped twig sounds like an approaching soldier, and every shadow could be your last. The forest was both their greatest shield and their first major test of endurance, a living fortress that offered a chance, just a chance, to outlast the storm. But simply running and hiding gets old fast. What happened when these peasants decided to stop running and start fighting back? The answer is where they get really dangerous. All right, let's flip the script, because peasants didn't just cower in the woods waiting for the soldiers to leave. They got angry, they got smart, and they turned their own backyard into a nightmare for any invading army. This is where the helpless farmer transforms into a low-key guerrilla mastermind. They use their encyclopedic knowledge of the local terrain to their advantage. That swamp the knights were trying to avoid, the peasants knew a secret path through it, perfect for an ambush. That narrow forest trail, ideal for a tripwire made of vines that could take down a warhorse. They conducted lightning-fast raids on supply lines, sabotaged equipment, and generally made life a living hell for the invaders. Think of it less as a formal battle and more as a series of brutally effective pranks. It was the Middle Ages version of a smaller team using ingenious hacks to crash a bigger company's server. This was proof that you don't need shining armor when you have superior knowledge and a serious grudge. This makes me curious. What's the most genius guerrilla tactic you've ever seen in a movie or a game? Let me know in the comments below. Next up, how did they protect their stuff when they were busy being part-time ninjas? So, you're a peasant on the run, a part-time guerrilla fighter, but you still have stuff. Not a 401k and a stock portfolio, but things that actually mattered. Grain to eat, seeds to plant next year, and maybe that one good iron pot that wasn't cracked. How do you keep it safe when an army is basically a medieval looting crew on steroids? You invent the world's most secure, low-tech, safe deposit box. A hole in the ground. It sounds simple, but this was a brilliant strategy. They would bury their most crucial supplies in carefully chosen, secret locations. This wasn't just about hiding food from hungry soldiers, it was an investment in the future. That buried sack of seeds was their promise to themselves that they would survive, that they would come back, and that they would rebuild. It was a profound act of hope disguised as a simple chore. Imagine the sheer nerve it took to trust the dirt beneath your feet more than any lock or guard. But hiding things out in the wild was just one layer of their security system. The real genius was what they did inside their own homes. Now we get to the truly paranoid, next-level stuff. Peasants knew their homes could be raided at any moment, so they turned their humble cottages into miniature fortresses of secrecy. We're talking about a level of ingenuity that would make a spy proud. Historians of rural life, like the great Mark Bloch, emphasize how the peasants' entire world revolved around their home and their land, so they defended it with secrets. They built false-bottomed chests, carved out hollow spaces behind hearthstones, and had loose floorboards that revealed hidden cellars just big enough to hide a person or a precious stash of food. Can you picture a heavily armed soldier stomping around a hut, completely oblivious to the family's entire livelihood, hidden just inches beneath his feet? It's the ultimate game of hide and seek, where losing meant starvation or worse. This shows they weren't just reacting to chaos, they were living with a permanent, well-planned survival strategy. If this level of medieval prepper ingenuity surprises you, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Up next, what happened when hiding wasn't enough and they had to turn the house of God into a house of war? Alright, so running is off the table, and hiding in your own flimsy wooden house feels like waiting for a wolf to blow it down. What's next? This is the point where the survival playbook gets flipped to its most desperate page. This is where scattered, terrified individuals stopped thinking about me and started thinking about us. They became a single, unified, cornered animal, and they decided to make a last stand. And their fortress? The one building in the entire village that wasn't made of wood and wishful thinking. The stone church. Forget quiet prayers and hymns for a moment. That local parish just got a battlefield promotion to a full-blown medieval battle bunker. Imagine the scene. The smell of incense and old stone suddenly mixed with the scent of sweat and fear. The sacred silence was replaced by the sound of heavy wooden pews being dragged across the stone floor to barricade the doors. The community would use the narrow, high windows, designed to let in heavenly light, as perfect, sinister spots for archers, or just for dropping rocks on the unsuspecting heads of anyone who got too close. The house of God, a place of sanctuary, was suddenly transformed into the last line of defense against the horrors of man. This wasn't a planned military defense with trained soldiers. It was a raw, desperate, and surprisingly effective show of community grit, fueled by the terrifying knowledge that there was nowhere else to run. But holding a physical position is one thing. What happens when the enemy isn't just outside the walls, but also inside your head? Let's get into the messy, uncomfortable part of survival that doesn't make it into the heroic ballads. What happens when you're caught? When you're face to face with an invading soldier who holds your life in his hands? The historical reality is that survival wasn't always a clean fight. Often it was a brutal, pragmatic negotiation. This is the moral gray zone. Peasants, to save their own skin or their families, would sometimes resort to bribery, offering up their last bit of food or silver. Others were forced into collaboration, acting as guides, providing information, or even snitching on their neighbors. It's easy for us sitting comfortably centuries later to judge these actions. But imagine being there. This isn't about loyalty. It's about making an impossible choice in a no-win situation. It was the medieval version of a high-stakes poker game, where the price of losing wasn't just your chips, but everything you held dear. It's a stark reminder that true history is rarely black and white. But for some, even collaboration wasn't an option. They chose a path of pure, devastating defiance. Now we come to the nuclear option in the Peasant Survival Guide, the most extreme, metal-as-hell tactic imaginable: scorched earth. This wasn't just a strategy, it was an act of communal self-destruction for the sake of survival. When an invading army was approaching, a force whose entire purpose was to burn and pillage, in devastating raids known as a chevauchée, some communities made a gut-wrenching decision. They decided to beat them to the punch. If they couldn't keep their land, no one would have it. Now, try to put yourself in that position. It's your own hands that have to light the torch that will burn down the home you built. It's you who has to lead your livestock to be slaughtered, not for a feast, but so the enemy can't eat. You watch as your field of golden wheat, an entire year's worth of back-breaking labor, turns to black, useless ash. The logic is savage but sound. An army marches on its stomach. If there's no food to plunder and no shelter to occupy, the invaders are weakened and forced to move on. It was the ultimate act of defiance, turning your most valuable asset, the land itself, into your final, most devastating weapon. It was a declaration that screamed, "Our survival is worth more than everything we own." After such total destruction, it's brutally clear no one could possibly survive alone. Which brings us to their ultimate superpower. So, through all this chaos, the guerrilla tactics, the secret stashes, the desperate last stands, what was the invisible thread holding it all together? It wasn't a king or a knight. It was the community. The true superpower of the medieval peasant was the person living next door. Survival was a team sport. This was the original social network, a human-to-human system built on shared information, pooled resources, and a collective will to live. Neighbors would warn each other of patrols, share hidden food supplies, and band together to defend a barricade. A single family might be weak, but a village moving as one, sharing a single brain dedicated to survival, was a formidable force. They were a network of resilience, proving that when everything falls apart, the one thing you can truly rely on is the person standing beside you. This wasn't just about being friendly, it was the fundamental core of their entire survival strategy. If you believe in the power of community to get through tough times, do me a favor, smash that like button and subscribe for more. Next, we'll look at the individual skills that made them masters of the wild. Alright, let's talk about the real medieval superpower. It wasn't magic, and it definitely wasn't a shiny sword from a lady in a lake. It was something much more practical, an encyclopedic, PhD-level knowledge of nature. When peasants fled to the forests, they weren't just entering a scary, unknown place, they were logging into their own biological internet. They carried a survival manual in their heads, passed down through generations. They knew which berries would kill you and which would make a decent, if sour, lunch. They knew which leaves could be mashed into a paste to treat a wound, and which roots, when boiled, could help a fever. This wasn't some casual camping hobby. This was a deeply ingrained skill set that turned the hostile wilderness into a functioning, life-sustaining pantry and pharmacy. Imagine having no app, no GPS, no guidebook, just the stories your grandmother told you about what moss grows on which side of the tree. That raw, earthy wisdom was often the only thing standing between a starving family and a full belly. But as much as nature could provide, what about the man-made world they left behind? How did they plan for that? This is where the peasant mindset gets truly remarkable. In the middle of absolute chaos, with their world literally burning around them, they had the incredible foresight to think about the future. This wasn't just about surviving the next 24 hours, it was about surviving the next generation. While burying their food to survive the week, they would also bury a separate, sacred stash, seeds. They saved the very kernels of their future harvest. They would hide their best plow blade or their sharpest axe head. Think about that for a second. It's an act of pure, stubborn, almost defiant hope. It's a bet against the apocalypse. It's looking at total destruction and quietly planting a garden. This wasn't just about being practical, it was a psychological rebellion. A statement that said, you can burn our homes and steal our food, but you cannot stop the next harvest. It's one of the most moving and deeply human strategies in their entire survival playbook. This resilience of spirit was powerful, but it often needed its own kind of fuel. Which brings us to their ultimate psychological armor. Let's investigate the role of faith in this whole mess, because it was far more than just praying for the best. In a world of brutal, random violence, religion provided structure and meaning. The church wasn't just a stone building, it was the community's psychological fortress. Faith acted as a kind of mental armor, a cool down for the trauma they were enduring daily. Imagine the collective power of a community huddled together, sharing prayers and rituals that have been the same for centuries. It created a powerful sense of shared identity and social cohesion that was incredibly difficult to break. It was the glue that held their sanity together. This wasn't just about finding comfort, it was about maintaining the mental and moral fortitude required to not give up. It was a constant reminder that there was something larger than the immediate horror of their situation, a belief that kept them human in the most inhuman of times. But what happens when the horror ends, the prayers are answered, and a new flag flies over the village? What does survival look like then? All right, it's time for a dose of harsh reality. The war ends, the dust settles, but there's no victory parade for the peasant. The happily ever after of fairy tales simply didn't exist. For them, the end of a war often just meant swapping one feudal lord for another, sometimes even one that had just destroyed their village. The final and perhaps most difficult act of survival was submission. It was the sober, unglamorous work of adapting to the new power structure. It meant figuring out the new taxes, the new rules, the new allegiances. Their resilience wasn't measured in battles won, but in seasons farmed and harvests collected, regardless of whose banner flew from the castle. This is the unromanticized truth of their existence. Survival was a relentless cycle of endurance and adaptation. They were the constant, the foundation upon which kings and kingdoms rose and fell. Which brings us to the final question. What is the true legacy of these silent, stubborn survivors? So after all this, the running, the hiding, the fighting, the praying, who exactly was the medieval peasant? History tends to focus on the names carved into stone, the kings, the knights, the nobles, but their stories are written on the castles. The peasant story is written on the land itself, etched into the DNA of survival that was passed down through generations. They weren't just helpless victims waiting for the end. They were guerrilla fighters, paranoid engineers, amateur fortress architects, and long-term strategists. They were the ones who knew the secrets of the earth and the unbreakable resilience of the human spirit. Their legacy isn't a grand monument or a crown jewel in a museum. It's far more important than that. It's the simple, stubborn fact that society continued. They were the silent protagonists who ensured there was always a day after the war. But what does their silent, stubborn fight truly teach us about our own struggles today? The answer is everything. The story of their survival is a powerful testament to the human spirit's incredible ability to adapt, improvise, and overcome in the face of absolute chaos. They faced invading armies and starvation. We face our own modern forms of warfare. Economic uncertainty, information overload, personal crises. The context changes, but the core struggle for resilience remains the same. Their history is proof that survival isn't about the armor you wear, but the ingenuity you carry inside you. It's about the strength of the community you build and the stubborn hope you refuse to let die. So as we leave this story behind, the echo of their survival remains, asking a simple, powerful question. In your own life, what does it truly mean to survive? This story lives on through us. If you feel the call to keep this knowledge safe, join our circle, subscribe, and become a traveler on this ongoing journey of medieval survival. Now, we ask you, of all the brutal choices they faced, which one would have tested your soul the most? Let us know in the comments. Leave a like on this video as a sign of respect for their struggle, a small gesture to keep the embers of their memory glowing. Spread the word and ensure these stories are never lost to the dust of history. The next chapter of medieval survival is on your screen. Click and continue the adventure.